This experience happened when my wife and I stayed in Banff National Park for the week back in September. We've always paid a visit to this beautiful landscape whenever we visit my folks in Calgary, Alberta. Although, we didn't think we would have a paranormal experience this time around. We try to do excursions that we haven't done yet every time we make a visit. A mix of touristy things and non-touristy stuff. Near the end of our trip, we were scheduled to visit the cave and Basin, which was a 7-minute bus ride from Banff town. We decided to go upon opening so that we can avoid the crowds and have lots of time to do other things on our list that day. Bit of info for those who haven't been to the cave and Basin, or Banff for that matter, is from what we read is a kind of museum where they show how Banff was rediscovered by Canadian railway workers back in 1883. Rediscovered because this national park was, and still is, a sacred land for Indigenous people. It's been like this for centuries before it was rediscovered. We came into the entrance of the tunnel to the cave, where these railway workers are said to have dug through and discovered a large sulphur well. This sacred cave was used by Indigenous people as a place for healing. Going through the tunnel is dark and its only light source is above the well itself, where the sunlight peeks through. It was quiet and eerie walking through the dark tunnel. I could hear whispers even if we were the only ones going in. Then, something told my wife not to look into the water in the well. She said after that she may not have liked it if she looked down there. We didn't stay too long in the cave, as it started feeling claustrophobic and the smell of sulphur was unbearable. My wife told me that what she felt when we came out of it. I told her that I did not see anything, and I looked into the well myself. Little did I know at the time that this creepy experience wouldn't end there. Next, we continued the tour and made our way to the top of the building, where a bridge connects the museum to the forest of Sulphur Mountain. As we crossed over, we saw a small cabin that served as lodging for the railway workers back then. We were right above the cave that we were just in, about half an hour ago. The cabin was surrounded by a large forest ascending up the mountain, and right when my wife was reading information about this cabin, I felt a dreadful feeling. A feeling I'm familiar with when there's a spirit or entity in the midst. It also felt like there's a number of people watching over us, even if it was just the both of us up here. As I looked from left to right, my eyes were drawn to the tall trees at the far back. And there, I saw a dark entity so massive and tall that it stood as tall as the tree beside it. Though I couldn't see its face, I knew it was staring at us, as if guarding the area. It didn't feel like a ghost, but a spirit entity that felt so old, maybe as old as the forest itself. I felt that we weren't welcome here anymore. I then mentioned to my wife that we cut our time here and we left with haste. It was only after we left the grounds that I told my wife what I saw. Seeing an entity like that was understandable, knowing how sacred that place is for Indigenous people. So whenever you get the chance to visit Banff or these national parks, learn the history, respect the land, its people, and the unseen guards. I am now 29 and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I won't give the name of the site or specific area to keep my job secure. This is going to be a long-winded post, but I'm confident that anybody interested in the paranormal will be satisfied. So here goes. So I was in the army at the time, when one of my closest friends landed this job first. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs whilst I got my momentum back in regular life, and also got myself an SIA license. Eventually, my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer, and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal, let's call him Jason, kindly drove me to the sites for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth man in his 50s, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences I've had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about two guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at this site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing there. He's a lot deeper into this stuff than I am, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we've shared many deep conversations about the subject. Saturday night, during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time and was ready to spend the next 12 hours alone enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. Gaming laptop straight out, albeit on whisper volume of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders, or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking, as it is out in the sticks somewhat and surrounded by farmland. But I'm very used to cutting about in the dark in places similar to my time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. For the first few shifts, I just heard the odd strange noise, which quite frankly could have been anything, from temperature expansion or contraction to wildlife. However, on the night prior to the staff returning to work for 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life, which genuinely scared me. It was the 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as I put one foot out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off the metal lockers, desk, etc., at head to torso height. I'm 6 feet tall. This didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. The first part of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story, medium-sized office building, where there were lots of stone pebbles to walk on, before coming out from the back of the offices and onto a relatively large car park, about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed next to me, and I thought nothing of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel toe boots and not felt it whatsoever. I got halfway across the car park and another landed just in front of me, as if it came from behind me. This is when I started to feel things weren't quite right, as the pebbles were way back at this point, and I would have felt it this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left, and a huge biffa skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking in between these for about 30 meters, and this is by far the creepiest part of the site, as it's so dark and dingy. This is when things start to get intense. I was still walking towards this area, and roughly 20 meters away when another pebble hit the biffa skip loudly, about 5 to 6 feet high. In other words, I would have had to get a bit of a run up and put effort into booting a pedal hard enough to get it high enough and to match the force it hit with. This really startled me, and I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds, looking all around myself, but there was nobody, and I was equipped with a 400 lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance. Nobody whatsoever. I reluctantly carried on out of duty down the alley past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I had gotten about 10 meters past the first shipment container when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and gave it a massive whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants whole, and it took every ounce of courage to immediately run back onto the car park and shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they could have gotten away in time unless they could contest Usain Bolt, and even that would be a stretch, considering it probably took me 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. The guard who gave me the induction is so interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happens, no matter the hour. So I continued to the centre of the car park to get a full field of view of the site, but of course, nobody. Suddenly I heard bang, 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 coming from all directions, but confined to within the site. shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins, with a low trajectory similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me is that the direction they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse, with no windows or doors from my point of view. So these tiny stones were being thrown at me from an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there was 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, just whizzed by my legs left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me, and not over the warehouse, which would be next to an impossible feat anyway. I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I've never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humour him anyway, all the while crapping my pants. I called out to it. Can't remember what I said. And everything immediately stopped and went silent. Nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said he's never known anybody get terrorised quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the blokes managing the site, and he said he would check the CCTV footage for any messes. Interestingly, the next shift a couple days later, the cleaner who used to be around for a couple hours after the staff left, called me into the office block to see a document printed out of an email. This was to my security firm about the events, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I've had very sparse experiences such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen. Very annoying, as security often gets the blame for this, understandably. Cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along the dusty warehouse floor, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I also got another very close friend, a job there who was also in the army prior, and also a massive skeptic until now. He literally laughed at myself and Jason whilst we gave him his induction, when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh as his attitude soon got to get straight. So a few nights into my other friend, let's call him Scott, working there, I get woken up to a phone call at about 1:30 a.m. And it's Scott with a trembly voice saying that somebody has just sprinted up the stairs, ran through the short corridor, and is currently outside the guard room door. I said, well, you're a security guard. Do your job and see who it is. Of course, nobody was there, and nobody could be there due to the coded doors. I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time now. It seems to have weeks to months of calm, followed by short bursts of activity. I've also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had an experience elsewhere besides one place to which I have video evidence of it. But I'm reluctant to share, and even then, I need permission from the guard who works that particular site. I've even worked at a number of derelict, creepy old mills. Nothing strange going on. I was about 10 years old when I saw this thing flash right before my eyes, right when recess was about to finish. It had multiple streaks of light, with a yellowish kind of colour to it, and had different strokes of the same streak of light, intertwined as I can vaguely recall it to be. In a matter of seconds, this very quick and huge bolt of light came and went so fast that it merely took a literal second for it to appear and disappear. It was almost, if I could put it into words, angelic looking, as if it had veins and tendrils. I was standing on the second floor balcony area of my classroom and was speaking to my classmate when this happened. It felt like it was something I wasn't supposed to see, and at that age, a lot of things ran through my mind right after seeing it appear, and immediately disappear right before my eyes. My classmate and I never spoke it after we both witnessed it, and just asked each other right after that moment, "Did you see that too?" And we both gave each other a straight-faced answer, yes. A lot went through our minds right after, and being that age and having a short attention span, we never revisited that image of what we saw again, until recently when we reconnected. Now, both at 26 years old, we wonder if there have been any similar instances of this happening to anyone out there. I know for sure it wasn't my imagination or a shared hallucination between both me and my then classmate. My husband and I are house-sitting / babysitting for my sister and brother-in-law while they're out of town this weekend. They have 2 children, 2 and 5. The 5-year-old has frequent nightmares and a tough time in general getting to sleep most nights. Tonight, for example, he called down at least 4 times before this incident. I kept going upstairs to rub his back or read him one last story. Isn't it always the last book? Maybe 5 minutes after my last trip to give him another hug and a drink of water, my husband was looking for a game to play on my sister's new VR headset. This headset is brand new and with just basic attachments and such. No headphones, so the sound comes out of the headset, or headband, itself. I heard my nephew mumbling upstairs. I figured he was reading himself a story, followed by what sounded like a low male's voice speaking back to him. At first, I thought it must have been the VR headset, until my husband ripped it off his head with a "What the fuck was that?" I said I assumed it was his headset, but I swore I heard my nephew talking and a man's voice talking back, to which he replied, "That's exactly what I thought I heard." He hadn't even decided on a game for the headset, so no sound was coming out. He begrudgingly went upstairs to check on my nephew, who was sound asleep. A kid that was wide awake 5 minutes prior. I know kids crash hard, so I'm not too suspicious about that. But how do we explain the voice? He checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. We have 3 large dogs who are alert and love a reason to bark. They've been calm all night. I called my sister to ask if they ever hear anything, which she replied with a quick no. But we're freaked out. How do we explain both hearing a very distinct low man's voice upstairs, what seemed like replying to my nephew? Their home is brand new, and it's an upper-class neighbourhood. Not that that matters much when it comes to the paranormal. As part of my university degree, I went to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico to do field surveys in various parts of the rainforest. We travelled across several sites looking at plants, animals, and doing a bunch of tests. This one site in particular was a sectioned off part of the rainforest about 2 miles in diameter that was semi-managed by the government. We went there once a day, walked around the site, did our tests, and then went back to the hotel. The rest of the day, we were allowed to relax and study our notes, and then in the evening, we headed back there to study the nightlife in the rainforest. We arrived at the site, unpacked our gear, paired up with our accountability buddies and groups, and then went into the rainforest. We had 1 torch per group, so a lot of us used the torches on our phones to see where we were going. We walked around the same route as we had in the day, and I was vigilant in checking my phone and its battery, because I was terrified of getting lost in the dark in the rainforest. We were just over halfway with the loop around the site, and I was sitting comfortably at around 80% battery, as I had the foresight of fully charging before heading out. Then, nothing. The last thing I remembered was admiring the reflection of the eyes of the crocodiles, intently keeping watch over our group. Then, when I came back to, I was on the other side of one of the villages that we had seen earlier in the day alone. My phone was at 1% battery. I was completely separated from my group, and I remember just staring into this old abandoned hut with the dim light of my phone. I immediately started to panic before I heard the laughter from another group on the opposite side of this small village about 50 feet away. So I rushed over and formed up with them. When I eventually reconnected with my group, they were worried and said that I was walking along, not saying anything. And then when we reached the village, they lost sight of me. I've tried to be as rational as I can thinking about the experience. I was tired, getting used to a new climate and arguably not as hydrated as I should have been, which could obviously play several large roles. However, it is important to note that I have a phenomenal memory, as that is how I have learned to study, and to completely forget what would have been a 40-minute walk is incredibly unlike me. Thinking back on the event, I still get chills, and the more I try to rationalize it, the more I feel like something unexplainable happened that night. My only comfort, really, is that apart from the fear of being abandoned in the rainforest at night, I never felt threatened or in any danger. Back on December 8th, I tested positive for COVID-19. I had to quarantine for 10 days. What was odd, that a couple of days later, during the hours of noon and 4 p.m., 2 or 3 people would ring my doorbell or knock on my door. I didn't answer the door. I noticed that they stood far away from the door. This happened at least 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, someone came to the door and started pounding on it. I yelled through the door that I couldn't open the door because I had COVID-19 and couldn't let them in due to having COVID-19. The guy apologizes for pounding on the door and left very quickly. On the 5th day, someone rang my doorbell twice at 2 a.m. I didn't answer the door and had my phone on in my hand, ready to call 911. I saw a white car parked on the street and saw a man at the door. On the 6th day, I heard 2 knocks on the door, but it didn't sound like a normal knock. When this woke me, I suddenly felt sick and felt like I was having an irregular heartbeat for about 30 seconds. And then I could hear my heart beating, and I felt a sense of terror. I had my phone ready to call 911. Something in my mind told me not to go near the door as I sensed danger. At this point, I felt like I needed to pray in order to get through whatever it was. I felt that whatever was outside was pure evil. I prayed for about half an hour, and then I felt okay. What was weird is that I kept hearing COVID-19 protected you from being physically harmed. I went back to sleep and woke up the next morning refreshed. While I was home for the remainder of quarantine, no one came by. I've heard that 3 knocks on the door in the middle of the night is a bad omen, often a warning of the death of a family member or close friend. 2 knocks I've heard is a warning not of death, but of serious illness or misfortune of family and friends. Another thing I've heard is that it's a warning to the person who heard it of being aware of evil around you. What happened shortly after this was a family member, an older stepsister, became ill and had to be hospitalized overnight. She's okay, but it was a serious health scare. Fast forward to yesterday. I came home yesterday evening and saw the police talking to someone that I didn't know. I went inside but kept noticing that the police car kept driving around the neighborhood. I finally asked a neighbor who told me that since December, he's had people coming to his house who appear to be solicitors, but they aren't. He told them he would call the police if they came to his house again, which they didn't. He believed that these individuals might be trying casing and targeting our neighborhood for burglary. They were trying to get into people's homes, and one of them would pound repeatedly on your door. Police were called because of this. I thought about what happened to me last month. The man who police talked to wasn't leaving, but was walking around the neighborhood. I didn't get a good look at him, so I'm not sure if he came to my house last month. I then happened to look through the peephole on my door as I heard what sounded like someone at my front door and saw a man standing there from a distance. I grabbed my phone as I wondered if this guy would try to kick the door down, as he could easily do that from where he was standing. 5 minutes later, he was gone. I assumed he was the same man the police were talking with, but I'm not sure. Interesting enough, the day this happened was the 22nd of January. Notice the number 2. The 2 doorbell rings at 2 a.m. were on the 12th of January. Do you think the doorbell rings and knocks of 2 were a warning of some type? Any feedback would be helpful to me. Update. I found out today that the man who police questioned wasn't the same man that came to my home back in December. Nor was he the guy that came to my door on Friday. The police are aware of what's going on and have added extra patrols. My front porch has a sense of peace, and one thing I noticed is that I haven't seen people that aren't familiar to me walking around the neighborhood. This morning, I felt like the evil presence had left the area. This happened in 1981. I was 19 years old and attending a Halloween party. The party was held on the second floor in the student union at the college I attended. There was a rumour that one of the punch bowls was spiked with alcohol. I didn't know which one, but I took several drinks from one and felt wonderful. During the movie, I left. I don't remember walking down the stairs, but I remember getting on a banister and then waking up sitting on the bottom step sleeping. Somehow, I didn't fall and hurt myself. I decided it's time to head home. I don't remember where my car is, so I decided to walk downtown and then try to find it later. I was dressed in a haram outfit and had 4-inch heels on. I got up and started walking out the door. I walked towards the downtown area of town, which at that time really wasn't a safe thing to do. There were a couple of bars there that were very rough and tumble. None of the students would go into those bars. There was one bar that was rumoured to be a place where women were lured into a bar and assaulted. I was almost to the downtown area when a white Cadillac pulled up and a guy that was dressed in a white tux and white box tie asked me if I needed a ride home. He told me to get into the car. I got into his car and then spread out on the back seat to sleep. This was before seatbelt laws. I remember him saying that he'd seen me walk out of the student union building and he was concerned about my safety. He told me the downtown area was unsafe for a woman who was alone and that he was there to protect me from harm. I remember seeing visions of what could have happened to me being in a dangerous area. This was very vivid and not specific to the downtown area where I was. They started out in a downtown area and then ended up on the beach. These visions were not of me. I saw a woman at a nightclub who had been drugged and hours later woke up on the beach naked and not knowing how she got there. It was very dark out as she was on the beach in the dark. She starts to cry and then screams. No one seems to hear her screaming for help. I woke up and I'm in a strange car. I went back to sleep. I saw the interstate which goes to the beach. Then I saw a woman who had been held against her will for several hours by several men. After dark, she was taken to a boat where she was tied up and bound in a way that she would go to the bottom of the ocean. She's then dumped into the ocean to drown, but somehow survives. The waves under force pulls her back to shore, and she's able to roll her body until she's in a safe area. She survives. The men got back to shore and carried on as though nothing had happened. I wake up and I see the ocean. It looks like this guy's driving on the beach at night. I go back to sleep. The last vision I see is a woman being threatened with a knife at a beach house who escapes running down the beach and gets away. When I woke up, the car was pulling into my grandmother's driveway. I never told this guy where I lived and how he knew my grandma's address, which was 15 miles from the party. My grandmother thinks this guy is someone I know and she talks to him briefly. She knows that something is off with me. When I got into her house, she realised that something wasn't right. She asked me if someone gave me drugs. I told her no. Then she starts tapping my face with her hands so that I don't go back to sleep. She looked at me and asked me if someone at the party attacked me. I said no. She asked me if someone put some alcohol in the punch at the party. I said, probably some drink which has no smell. She then asked me who the guy was, and I told her I didn't know. The next thing she said was that my guardian angel was looking out for me, as this guy could have harmed me or done anything, and if I had survived, I wouldn't be able to tell anyone much about him. After a couple of hours, I went to sleep, woke up the next morning and was fine. I get my car the next day. I asked people at the party, and no one knew this guy, nor had anyone seen this guy at the party or on campus. To the angel dressed in a white tux, white box tie, driving a white Cadillac, I thank you for protecting me from harm. I'm from South India. There's a popular belief here that the firstborn son of a firstborn son are most vulnerable to and attract evil spirits. I was about 12 when I encountered this experience. I'm not a very religious person, but my family is. We embrace all religions equally, and the most common ones in India are Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. It was summer break at that time, and I used to ride my cycle all day with my friends. I felt sick one day, and it turned out to be one of the worst paranormal experiences of my life. Yes, I've had many, and this is the first one. I had a fever for almost a week. Couldn't sleep a bit because I had night terrors and hallucinations. Fever seemed to go down with the meds, but I was drained and my eyes looked dead. Emotionally, I was far from normal. So days passed by and fever was down, but everyone knew I wasn't me. Extreme hunger, but will regurgitate whatever I ate. Then after a week, my grandmother decided to take me to a Muslim woman's house in my locality, who performs cleansings. People call her Bayama. The cleansing room was on the first floor. I could barely climb the stairs. The interior was painted in shades of green with Arabic script written all over the walls. Bayama was in her early 40s when I first met her. My grandmother explained that I was sick and thought I would feel better after a cleansing. Bayama told me to step in and asked my grandmother to wait outside. I didn't want to go in without my grandmother and almost cried. Bayama held my hand and said something in Arabic and took me inside and closed the door. It was a dull green room with windows nailed shut. There was a chair by the wall, which I knew was Bayama's. She told me to sit down on the floor and cross my legs. She took a plain white towel from a box, closed her eyes and recited an Arabic prayer and waved the cloth in circular motion around my face. I could barely open my eyes to see what was happening around and was already crying without my conscience. I could feel myself rocking forward and backward. In a loud voice, she asked me to pick a number between 1 to 30. Before I could choose a number, she asked again even louder. And I said 31. Now don't judge me, I'm good at math. I glanced at her face and she had this extremely violent expression and was staring at a fixed point above my shoulders. I closed my eyes shut. She took a handful of water, or what I assumed was holy water, from a jar and sprinkled it on me. I swear my stomach started to cramp. The pain was unbearable and I fell on one side and was laying on the floor. She recited a prayer and circled around me and was waving the white cloth. She sat on the chair and asked for a number again. I don't remember the exact number that I said this time, but it was less than 20. She told me to pick myself up and stand straight. I was able to. The whole process was about 15 to 20 minutes. She gave me some water to drink and tied a holy rope around my wrist, which is meant to repel evil beings. She opened the door and I could feel the fresh air after many days, which was revitalizing. She told me to wait outside and asked my grandmother to come in. The door was open, so I could overhear their conversation. Bayama said an evil spirit, commonly known as Kattu Karapu in my native language, Tamil, has latched onto me and that cleansing was done without any harm. She gave an egg and asked my grandmother to place it in the living room overnight and to throw it away the next morning. Don't really know why. Before we left, she advised me to always wash my legs when I come back home from outside. I was able to eat and was feeling way better by the next day. So me and my girlfriend of almost 4 years finally moved into our own house, with no real issues aside from the common stress of being a young teenager moving out on our own. After a few weeks, everything was nice. We settled in well, but we started hearing a lot of creaks and moans at night. A little more than we've been, and kept going on late night walks, thinking someone broke into the house. As I'm sure you expect nothing, not a thing. We just chalked it up to the house being old and adjusting to us moving in. Well, fast forward about 2 months, and we started hearing super loud bangs. More precisely, I was at first, but every time I did it, it was me being woken up to the bang. So my girlfriend insisted it was happening in my dream and waking me up. That was till it started waking her up as well. This wasn't super common, but it is slowly increasing. And I never ever can find a source. Nothing knocked over out of place. The cherry on top here is the suicide in the detached garage we were not informed up before moving in. I commonly invite my brother and his significant other over to play games and drink on the weekends. And my brother's significant other found out one of her old high school friends lived nearby, so she went to visit. According to the high school friend, she knew the girl who lived here back in 2019, and she ended up shooting herself in the garage. My brother's significant other insisted we get the house saged, but I'm not really into all that stuff. It just feels like fake mumbo jumbo to me. But then again, all of this does. So she had her friend sage the place, but it only seems to have increased. My brother and his son even heard the bangs when they were over one weekend. Not really sure what to do. Just before Christmas, my girlfriend and I went to visit her mother. We'll call her Jill. She was recently separated from someone who will be perceived as extremely negative and toxic. Nobody was sad to see him leave. Shortly after arriving, I went upstairs in the house to use the washroom, when all of a sudden, I had an overwhelming sense of fear, and all the hairs on my feet stood up. It really creeped me out, and as a 33-year-old man, I kept telling myself I was just acting crazy. It was like I could feel eyes on me from all of the bedrooms, just staring. Not long after that, I started feeling very nauseated and developed a headache. I started hearing footsteps upstairs, and I was really starting to question my sanity. But I kept all of this to myself. My girlfriend eventually started complaining of a headache and nausea, and then I knew something was wrong. But I wasn't about to ruin the evening by suggesting something paranormal is going on in the house. My first inclination was carbon monoxide, but Jill was absolutely fine, and I could see that the devices were functioning. We left Jill's and proceeded on our way home when I told my girlfriend that I was feeling ill inside the home. And she then told me she was hearing noise coming from upstairs also. I was trying to stay as calm as possible given the situation, and I didn't want to upset my girlfriend. Jill had been involved in a series of unexplained accidents leading up to this night, which include little things like tripping over things frequently to big things like falling off a ladder outside. She claims she didn't fall and that the ladder just kicked out from underneath her. We brought this to Jill's attention the following day, where she advised us she had no idea, but was very freaked out and proceeded to smudge the house. The girlfriend went back a few days later and claimed she was still very freaked out and unsettled in the home. A few days later, a friend of Jill's walked her through various methods of cleansing the home. I haven't been back since, but the girlfriend has been and says it doesn't feel as unsettling as before, but she's still unsure. For context, I'm a 15-year-old white British atheist male.
and I live in an old farming town. My house is new. Every now and then, 2 to 4 weeks, I'll have a dream which is almost exactly like a day in your normal life. But it's not me. It's somebody else from mostly different times. There are around 5 lives, but there are 2 I very rarely experience, having only been in them 4-ish times each time. I can control what happens in these days consciously, and remember what happened to whoever I am before this. But I don't realise that isn't my life until I wake up or return to a dream in my life. The most common one is when I became I think, Chinese girl about 14 some time ago. I'm not sure of the time period because I don't think anybody ever brought it up, but it was definitely centuries ago. We farmed some sort of grain for a living, and her mother died to a snake curse, which I now recognise as just being venomous. I can remember important features of these lives, but not minor ones, like when I got a bruise or saw a certain animal, unless I'm actually in the life. Then it's like remembering something in my life. Another less common one is a young boy someplace in northwest Eurasia, maybe Poland or Russia. I haven't been there in my dreams as much, so I haven't experienced a lot of his life. But I know he's small and gets bullied a bit because of malformation on his face, which I never saw because they don't have mirrors in the town. I'm losing the plan I was going with for this post, and I only recently realised this wasn't normal. So I've had a hard time trying to understand I might be one of these lives. Let me elaborate a bit. These lives are real. It's exactly like this life in every way while I'm there. I have free will to do what I want in them, not like lucid dreaming. Any questions would be greatly appreciated, as it would help me distinguish what's normal about this and what's not, as I'm antisocial as fuck and don't talk about this to people in real life. After arriving at my first duty station, I quickly worked to get out of the 1960s dorms and into a place of my own. Had a guy I got along with well enough to mention he and his wife were looking for a roommate. Went through the whole process of vetting and such and moved in. For various reasons, this arrangement lasted maybe 7 months. After a bit of time with no issues, I began to get the stereotypical you're being watched feeling, especially while alone. Having 2 dogs and a cat that never seemed to freak out about it put me at ease. A bit of time goes on and a little thing starts happening. Things will fall or move or go missing for no reason. One night, we had a glass plate just randomly, somehow, fall out of a cupboard and smash on the floor below. Checking the cupboard and plate supply, that's what happened. No plausible explanation in sight. We began to jokingly refer to it as the ghost of the upstairs neighbour, as for months we'd hear the upstairs neighbour making noise at all hours, then one day stopped, likely just moved out. Friend and I began to share past experiences with unknown forces. He had had an experience with a Native American ghost out west, where he'd come from. Well, that's a whole other story. The big event in question was on a night where he and his wife went out for a date night, leaving me with the 2 dogs and cat. Until about 8 PM, things were fine. I was playing some game on the couch with the animals in their usual spots. Then I started getting the usual feeling of being watched and tried to ignore it. All of a sudden, there was this tension in the air. It was hot and heavy, hard to breathe. For the first and only time I'd seen, the animals freaked out. Meow ran towards the married couple's bedroom. Odin and Zeki completely stood up and were growling, snarling, and being aggressive towards a spot close to the TV. I couldn't see or feel any presence per se, but all my internal alarms were going off. It's at this point I very carefully and slowly turned off the PlayStation and TV, preparing to make an exit, that the crucifix above the fireplace flies off of it. Not super far, maybe 2 feet where it landed from the fireplace. But when it happened, the dogs jumped back and one of them barked. I grabbed the little one in my arms and grabbed the big one's collar and started running to my room. God, just typing this is making me a bit jittery. We get in there and they both get on my bed as I'm slamming the door shut and turning the lights on. I quickly moved to also shut the bathroom door, as the bathroom was connected to my room and the main living area. The big one spent the remainder of the night with eyes locked on the door, and the little occasionally growled but stayed attached to my hip. Called my roommates home and told them everything. They didn't appear as spooked as I was. I did think about trying to get Meow, but frankly, he liked to bite me anyways, so I wasn't risking going out there for him. I think I went around the house the next time I was alone and tried to send the spirit or demon out, but I didn't feel very confident. At the time, I wasn't all that good a Christian. The friend was technically a Catholic, though despite his experiences with the paranormal, was leaning towards agnostic. His wife followed a specific form of Buddhism, I do not know which. The house just felt off in terms of spiritual energy, but maybe I was just paranoid after the event. Smaller occurrences still occurred. There were more than a few nights I kept the lights on at night, and the one other notable event was toward the end of my time there. The couple had a child who was crying every night, and I wasn't having that, so I opted to move out. A short while before my departure, we were standing in the living room talking nonsense, when the door to my room violently shut. He was drunk, and we were already a little excitable. Rather than scared at the time, this made us slap happy, laughing hysterically about the fucking ghost of our neighbour. I woke up a couple hours ago and have been in and out of sleep because of just a lot of strange stuff. I kept hearing noises like little scuffles and clicks. It would immediately bring me out of my sleep. The one time I did fall asleep, I had a dream where I was in the other room watching something or on my laptop, and I could hear someone in my kitchen talking. And I remember getting this overwhelming feeling that the person wasn't good, so I ran back to my bedroom, and that's when I woke up with my heart racing and breathing fast. Not that scary, I know, but the freaky part to me about that one was how real it felt. I laid there for a few minutes and closed my eyes. I could feel myself slowly falling back asleep, and ever so slowly, it felt like something else was in the room with me. I forced myself not to freak out and to calmly just go back to sleep. After a couple more minutes of laying there, trying to sleep, I felt something slowly put pressure on my feet and start to drag me. Not quick, but slow. As soon as I thought, what the hell? It stopped. I still didn't open my eyes, and I told myself, okay, let's just wait a second and see what happens, because I still felt the pressure on my feet. Again, it slowly started to drag me, this time a little farther than last, and it freaked me out, to where I just wanted to get up and run. I sat up and freaked out, but I didn't run. I sat there and told myself to calm down and just think. I still felt this presence of something very bad in the room, and I felt it getting worse before I finally got up and said, I'm done trying to sleep. But that was by far one of the freakiest things that's ever happened to me. It all started when I was in middle school. I'd get home and enjoy my time by myself while my mom was gone to get my younger brothers. It started with little things here and there. I would take my shoes off by the door, and maybe a little later I would walk by them to grab something from the kitchen. But that's when I noticed they would go from being side by side to being in a T position. I'd always shrug it off and assume I did that carelessly and didn't remember. Then I started hearing people talking coming from the other rooms. After a week of that, I started hearing knocking noises and things would get pushed off my desk. I could go on and on about the little things that happened, but what really struck me was the night I was laying in bed facing the wall. I felt a cold hand grab my shoulder, almost like someone trying to get my attention. I thought for sure it was my mom. I turned and looked, but saw no one. I immediately panicked and ran to my mom's room. That was the first time it really frightened me. After that happened, I didn't see it or feel it for a while. Fast forward a few years later to the beginning of high school. I invited a friend over to hang out, and he planned on staying the night. He ended up going home because he claimed to see the face of an old man staring at him in the mirror hung in my bedroom. After that, all the little things that were happening a few years prior slowly started happening again. It was manageable though. I could still sleep through the night without being bothered at the time. It kept doing the little things, moving shoes, making little knocking noises, and just general things that would make you sit there and say to yourself, no, that was probably just something I did. Eventually, it left again. A few years after that, I graduated and started going through the EMT/Fire Academy. I remember the first night it started pretty vividly. I was laying in bed and my cat was at the foot of the bed. My bedroom was at the end of a small hallway. The hallway has a door to it and a bathroom right next to my bedroom. I was playing on my phone and all of a sudden heard the loudest bang come from the bathroom. It sounded like someone kicked the hell out of the bathroom door. You could hear the initial hit and the door bouncing off the wall. I jumped and for a split second thought it was my cat, but quickly realised he was still on the end of my bed. The same night, I felt someone sit down at the end of my bed and started to rock back and forth. After that first night, it would do that every single night for the rest of my time at my mom's house. It would always sit down, stand up, and then pace around my bedroom, almost as if this spirit was very anxious. After a solid month of dealing with it nightly, I started to think I was losing my mind, so I told a couple friends of mine. One of them has a mom that was very into tarot card readings and was good at it. At the time, I didn't believe in any of that. I was already having a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that I was being haunted by a ghost. Anyways, even though I didn't believe in the readings, she ended up nailing a lot of info about my grandpa that passed away when I was really young. She even described what he looked like and guessed his name perfectly. Even with me being as skeptical as I was, I quickly started to believe what she was saying. She and another person I met that did readings as well both said that my grandpa wasn't the one haunting me, but instead is there protecting me from this other spirit that's been bugging me. They also said that the spirit has something to tell me. To this day, I still don't know what it is, and that there are multiple spirits that go through that house. Taking all that info was crazy to me. Believable, but crazy. Especially since I just wanted to get answers on how to get rid of it at the time, because I wasn't getting any sleep at night. After taking all that info in and learning how to get rid of it, I felt a sense of relief. I still had a lot of questions, and still do, but was relieved. I eventually moved out of my mom's and live on my own now. Unfortunately, it never fixed my ghost problem. It follows me anywhere I go, though lately it hasn't been bad at all. I've gotten used to it at this point, and I'm no longer as scared as I used to be when unexplainable things happen. It really makes me wonder about a lot of things though. When the spirit came and left for periods of time, where did he go? What was it that he had to say so badly? I worked in retail in a small store around a friendly community. Being in such a small store allowed me to get to know the regulars and customers personally. After about 2 years of this, I got very comfortable and close with those regulars. One of those regulars asked me if I'd like to go there to watch a movie one night. I gladly accepted the invitation. As I've previously been around a few other clients' houses for barbecues, and I wasn't even introduced to The Walking Dead by a family I got to know. So there wasn't anything strange about it at all. I knew her and her son, and we all got along very well. So the night came, and I arrived at their house around 8 pm. We all agreed to watch Resident Evil. As we put the movie on, we all got comfortable on the two sofas in the living room. But as we reached the movie's halfway mark, I began to feel uncomfortable and odd. I shrugged it off. I was asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine. About 10 minutes later, though, my head began to hurt. I figured I'd stay until we finished the movie and head home, as I had work the next morning. But it wasn't too long after that, my head got a lot freaking worse. It felt so immensely bad, I asked if we could pause the movie so I could go get some fresh air outside. As I got outside, I explained how my head just out of nowhere had just started to hurt more and more. They told me they didn't want me to leave as I apparently looked really, really pale. They were concerned about me and me reaching home and insisted I stay. So I messaged my manager then and there just to say I will be absent the following day. After a lengthy conversation outside, we got back into the living room and they gave me a small blanket to pitch on the sofa with. But my condition got worse. The energy I had was gone and my body began to uncontrollably shake. It wasn't the temperature. I explained this is the first time I ever had this happen and that I was sorry for being a burden in their home. Eventually, we all went to bed. I stayed in the living room alone, still shaking with such a throbbing pain in my head. This went on until about 4 am. That was when I finally managed to fall asleep. About 4 hours later, morning came and they woke me up. They asked me if I felt any better. Oddly enough, I did. My head pain and shivering all went, just like that. I told them I felt a lot better and thanked them for letting me stay, as it was very kind of them to put up with me. After a while, I got my stuff and left. We still talk about it today, but the odd thing is, after being on the subject of paranormal, she told me her son has supposedly seen ghosts circling in that same living room a while back. I don't know if this is linked, but it interested me. Someone close to me spoke too about this and mentioned how it's very possible something bad happened there. Wherever it was a Ouija board, seance, or some other summoning method messed with, they also told me that these and other ghosts are also possibly attracted to me because I'm very open to them. I never figured out what that meant. All I know is I've never experienced such head pain before. No headache, sickness or migraine has ever come close to that pain. This is something that happened to me personally about 3 years ago, and I'll never forget it. I was staying around my friend's house for the night. I can't remember why, but I do know it was a common thing for me to do, especially on weekends. His parents never minded as they like me and I would game with him, his brother and sister at times. So I was used to my surroundings there, absolutely comfortable, till this one night. Time was heading to around 1 am and we decided to call it a night. He had a bunk bed, so I stayed on the bottom bunk. He shut the door, switched the light off and climbed on the top bunk. His dog got comfortable next to me on top of the duvet. The bottom bunk was large enough for like 2 people, and I eventually fell asleep. This is when I experienced this. I remember waking up seeing the door already open, and seeing some dark black shadow just staring at me. It slowly made its way to me. It was absolutely terrifying. I tried moving, but couldn't. No matter how hard I tried, it was helpless. All I could do was watch in terror as it moved over me on the bed and started strangling me. I began to panic at this point. I even tried to yell for help as I was being pinned down and strangled by this pitch black entity. And just as suddenly as it happened, I woke up with a large inhale as I forced myself up from the bed. I saw the dog scared out of its wits by the door looking at me with my friend's mum. She was telling me she was woken up by the sounds of me yelling in fright and witnessed me just have some sort of real horrible nightmare. It just turned 3 a.m. I apologized over and over again to everyone as I was the one who woke them up. They all went back to bed. However, I didn't. I stayed up till 7 a.m. That's when my mum's friend came down the stairs. I explained I hadn't slept the remainder of the night, and again I was sorry. She told me she didn't blame me after what had happened, and not to worry about it. I'm unsure whether it was a dream or reality, but I do remember being very shaken up over it all. It was the only time I've ever experienced this. And of all places, it was my friend's house, who I've been staying around for years, and never had an episode or experience like that.